While the Irish were battling for independence, so were the people of India. When we last left India, the British had put India under the rule of an official called the Viceroy of India. The Viceroy, or Vice-Regent, ruled India in the name of the Queen Victoria of England. The British called India the Raj, the Indian name for kingdom, because India was now firmly part of the British Empire. The new capital of this Raj was now Delhi, not the old capital city of Calcutta. With the Irish rebellion over, the British tried to improve India for their subjects. They built railroads and roads, laid telegraph lines, and improved India's harbours so that more ships could trade in the Indian ports. The British in India thought that they had a duty to bring English customs and ways to India, because they still believed that the English customs were much better than the Indian ways. The writer Rudyard Kipling called this duty the white man's burden. But Indians wished that the British would set down this burden. No matter how much the British talked about doing good for India, the Indians could see clearly that the British had more privileges, more wealth, and a better life. British citizens lived in separate neighborhoods where the only Indians were servants. Most British in India had plenty of Indian servants, nursemaids, cooks, and nannies. The Indians called the white man sahibs and the white woman mem sahibs, Indian words that meant master and mistress.
Go to it.
The Indians didn't want masters and mistresses. The British knew this. As a matter of fact, before World War I, the British had begun to agree that they might try to treat India in the same way that they had treated Canada and Australia, by giving the Indians self-rule. After World War I, the British no longer paid attention to this promise. They were too occupied with trying to recover from the dreadful fighting that had killed so many English men. But the Indians had also suffered from World War I. Over 100,000 Indian soldiers had also died, fighting in the British regiments and in defense of Great Britain. At the very least, India should be rewarded with freedom. The loudest group of Indians calling for independence was called the Congress Party. By the time World War I ended, the Congress Party was led by a lawyer named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He had grown up in a Hindu family, studied law in England, and then travelled to South Africa. There he spent years working to improve the lives of Indian immigrants. In South Africa, Indians were treated as badly as blacks because of their dark skin color. Gandhi stayed away from India for 21 years. When he returned to his home country, he felt like a stranger. But news of his work for Indians in South Africa had spread back to India. Gandhi already had a reputation as a man ready to work for justice and independence. In the first year after he came back to India, Gandhi decided to travel around his country by train and see the villages and cities that he had not visited for over 2 decades. What he found was an India in which there was poverty, dirt, disease, and misery. So he joined the Congress Party and tried to get Indians from every small village in India to join it. The Congress Party swelled to include millions of people. In 1919, demonstrators from the Congress Party met in the holy city of Amritsar to protest against British rule. Amritsar in the north of India was the most sacred city on earth for the Sikhs, followers of the Sikh religion, who lived in India. Like Muslims, Sikhs believed that there was only one God. In ancient times, Sikhs had been warrior princesses. In more recent times, they had served as the royal bodyguards for the Emperor of India. Amritsar was a sacred city because the Golden Temple stood in it. This Golden Temple was at the center of a wide, still pool of water, whose waters were said to give eternal life to those who wash in them. A white stone bridge led to the Golden Temple, so that the Sikhs worshippers could walk across the water into the temple and see the Granth Sahib, the holy books that were kept inside it. The demonstrators gathered in a garden near the pool and the Golden Temple called Jallianwala Bagh. Even though they were unarmed and not causing any trouble, this gathering was illegal. The British had passed laws against large public demonstrations. The British officer in charge of the Amritsar soldiers came out to the grassy garden with his troops, but instead of telling the unarmed demonstrators to go away, the soldiers began to fire at them without any warning. Over 300 unarmed people died. Over 1,000 were wounded. Today, if you visit Amritsar, you can still walk in the garden of Jallianwala Bagh and see the bullet holes in the brick archways that surround it. It's horrible. The whole country was outraged. This seemed like the perfect time to begin a war for independence. But Gandhi refused to allow his followers to pick up weapons. He told the members of the Congress Party that an armed man could be a coward, but that an unarmed man must be courageous. Real independence had to be won with non-violent fighting for freedom and justice. Instead of fighting with weapons, Gandhi and the Congress Party began to use other methods of resisting the British. They taught the Indians to resist with non-cooperation, meaning that Indians simply refused to pay taxes to the British government. They encouraged Indians to boycott British goods, refuse to buy anything made in Great Britain. Gandhi told his followers to make their own handmade cloth for their clothes rather than buying British cotton. When the British put a tax on salt, Gandhi led his followers on a march of 240 miles to go collect salt from the sea, rather than buying the taxed salt. He started with 78 people. By the end of the march, thousands of people were following him. Gandhi told Indians to take their children out of British schools. He asked them to give up privileges given to them by the British. He himself sent back a medal that the British government had given him for his work in South Africa. When a factory refused to give its workers enough money to live on, Gandhi went on a hunger strike. He refused to eat until the factory owners agreed to the raise. It took 3 days for the factory owners to give in and agree. They didn't want to be responsible for Gandhi starving to death. The British put Gandhi in jail again and again, but the resistance in India, called the Nationalist movement, continued to grow. It wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes Gandhi's non-violent protest inspired other rebels to fight with weapons. Between the violent and non-violent resistance, India had grown impossible to govern. After the Amritsar massacre, the British finally agreed that they would start to change the way India was governed, so the country could slowly become independent, but it would take 30 years for that promise to be fully kept. So let's review. The non-violent resistance was led by Muhammad Gandhi, and it led to refusal to pay taxes, boycotting British goods, and the Indians making their own handmade cloth, and also a march to go get sea salt instead of the tax salt. Under Gandhi's leadership, he told the followers to avoid British schools. He asked followers to give up the British privileges, and he sent back his medal that he got from serving in South Africa. He also went on a hunger strike to help factory workers, and he was jailed over and over again.
That's off! I shouldn't have had those artichoke poppers.